Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to today's Just SA webinar, Blending Outcomes. My name is Heather Bell, Business Development Manager at Just SA, and it is my absolute pleasure to be your host today, along with Jared and Dom. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. Today's session asks an important question. What really happens when we blend living annuities with guaranteed life annuities, particularly when investment markets have been strong? Because strong markets can sometimes mask the real income sustainability risk that a client may be carrying. So today we're going to move beyond the theory and we're going to look at the evidence. That evidence includes retirement income case studies from 2017 to 2025 and consider what those outcomes mean for the conversations that advisors are having with clients today. We'll also look at why waiting isn't necessarily a free option, how phased blending can provide a practical alternative, and finally, where the value of advisor judgment sits in a world where AI can increasingly provide information, projections, and calculations. Before I introduce our speaker, just a quick note on the session today. As Shane mentioned, we'd like for this to be interactive, so please engage with us. Our speaker will be asking some audience participation. You've already tested it, so keep those buttons close by. And while you're there, please also submit any questions or comments in the Q&A box throughout the session, and we'll bring them up either during or at the end of the session. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Bjorn Ladewig. Bjorn is Head of Distribution and Marketing at Just SA and is a qualified actuary. Bjorn brings extensive experience and expertise in the retirement income space, together with a practical understanding of the challenges and the opportunities advisors face when helping clients make those important financial decisions. And I think today's topic gives Bjorn plenty to work with. So we are delighted to have Bjorn with us today, and we hope that you enjoy today's session. Bjorn, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather, and thanks, team. Heather really sounded like you're on the roll there. Maybe you just could have continued there, but happy to step in and looking forward to having a good discussion with everyone today. A fun topic, but also an important one. And as you guys may know, we're quite passionate about making sure retirees have an income that lasts for life. And in that sense, nothing better than having a hybrid retirement engine to back you. But more about that as we go along. Heather highlighted the various sections we'll be going through, but I'll take you through that one by one. But first, as I mentioned, we'll be talking about a hybrid retirement engine. Quickly on that, we prefer actually calling it blended living annuities or blending, but nothing like a good analogy just to get some key concepts through. And for that, we thought we'll start with a little bit of crowd participation. Don't worry, no spotlights on anyone. This is just to socialize a bit of a thing, but then also to highlight something which I think has been in front of us all our lives, and maybe some have seen it, but I do think many haven't seen it before. So for that, Shane also quickly said and showed how you could react. There's not a surprise face on GoTo. We had that on Teams, but here it's a thumbs up and thumbs down. In fact, if you know what a field gauge tells you, and we'll go through a few of those, give us a like if you knew that, and give a thumbs down or any other emotion that you didn't know about that. Okay, so we're looking here at a standard fuel gauge on a car. I guess the newer style cars, the very digital and electric ones, are probably moving away from some of these fuel gauges. But I think this is recognizable to everyone. So let's start with the 4 things we wanted to highlight which such a gauge can tell you. And the first one is the overall level of fuel tank. So let me see that. Do you know that? If so, give us a few likes. If you didn't know that, give us thumbs down or anything else. But maybe then just to bring this in retirement terms, this is like showing what the client's fund value is. It's the first thing they check on their statement, and it's the first thing they ask you about. It's useful, very important, yes, but on it only tells you a few things. It does not tell you actually how far you have to go to. So the second thing, and you keep on those emotions running through, the reaction, the second thing the gauge tells you is when you're in the low fuel or reserve zone. So that's that shaded bit there at the bottom. It's telling you you're not empty yet, but you're now running on what's left in the reserve. And that is almost like in retirement plans, we have a similar zone. We'll be talking about zones later. You'll hear me talk about the danger zone. So that's the second thing you can tell from a standard fuel gauge. The third one is that low fuel light level. So the gauge shows you a level, but this light actively tells you something is wrong. It doesn't wait for you to look, it demands attention. And I quite like that. So yeah, let's see if you guys know this, and we'll move on to the fourth one. And this is maybe the one that not all of us know about. So here's the one that may get some thumbs down. See that little arrow next to the fuel pump? That tells you which side of the car the fuel cap is on. Actually, that's something I only learned a few years ago. I never saw it, and I think my brother pointed it out to me, and I'm like, it is just unbelievable. It's been on the dashboard all the time. We've all looked, or many of us have looked past it thousands of times without seeing it. And that's exactly the point I wanted to make about blending. The information is there, we just haven't been reading it. And that maybe more specifically, blending has been around for 9 years in South Africa, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's still gaining traction, but not used as much as it could be. And I think some of it is because we're not necessarily reading the gauges right, and maybe also a little bit of take up in the market, getting used to it. But more about that later. Okay, so why are we comparing a hybrid or blended annuity to a hybrid engine? So let's open up to the engine, and we've been talking about this car analogy deliberately because that's what a blended annuity is. It's a hybrid between a guaranteed lifetime income component and a living annuity. So in this section, we'll look a little bit at why hybrids have taken off, how the income sustainability map tells you when to blend, and how the structure works in practice. Okay, so going back then, and having just a bit of fun here with cars. So let's go back to where hybrids really started. So in 1997, so that's 29 years ago, Toyota launched the Prius. This was the first mass-produced hybrid car, not the first hybrid car ever, but the first mass-produced car. So Toyota did their thing and made it accessible to people out there. The focus was simple: fuel efficiency and lower emissions, not about performance. I think they've gone through 5 generations over the years. Fair to say, probably not the sexiest car out there, but certainly doing its thing. And hybrids meant efficiency. But if you go to now and look at that beautiful Lamborghini Revuelto, launched in 2023, it combines a 6.5 liter V12 with 3 electric engines, combined 1,000 horsepower, which gives it 0 to 100 kilometers in just 2.5 seconds, and the top speed of over 350 kilometers. And that is what has happened. Hybrid is no longer only about saving fuel. It's also about delivering instant torque, all-wheel drive, and extreme acceleration. So in less than 30 years, hybrids have evolved from a fuel-saving breakthrough to a 1,000 horsepower performance car. Fantastic. Same concept, but completely different purpose. If we take that analogy to what we're talking about today, so picture it like this. So assume that the guaranteed life annuity is that old style internal combustion engine, dependable as always. And here it is special in that the fuel never runs out. And why I say that is the life pool will ensure that it's always got enough fuel. And if that pool doesn't suffers a bit, the insurer will back that and make sure that there's enough fuel. And we all know that the range of of internal combustion engines are just much longer. And that's why we're saying, imagine that coral bit, so the guaranteed life annuity being an ICE, as they call it, internal combustion engine. Living annuities are like electric engines. They're powerful and modern. Range can be an issue though, especially if you push it hard, and then it takes a long time to recharge. So you have to be careful how you use it. But combined, it gives you a sustainable, best of both worlds solution. And to set the scene and work through some of the case studies, we're going to talk a little bit about what income sustainability maps are. It's something that we have been doing since 2019, and it does really just set the scene nicely and give you context for when we talk through some of our case studies we're going to cover today. So what is an income sustainability map? Well, think of it as a single picture that tells you at a glance whether a client's income is sustainable. You'll see later that we show these living annuitants as dots, and each dot represents then a living annuitant, which shows the distribution of annuitants, firstly by age on the horizontal axis, typically from age 50 to 85 is what we show, and then drawdown on the vertical axis. And as you know, that can be in the range from 2.5% to 17.5%. We then overlay two lines. This blue line, which we've just dubbed FSCA, but that's their safe drawdown rate. That was published in a draft paper on the standard for default living annuities. And that gives a nice safety area because those are by definition, according to their calculations, sustainable rates. And as you can maybe see there, it varies from around 4% to 8%, varying by age. So it goes higher over ages. And the reason for that is that the remaining life expectancy goes down. And then females and males are different. Females will be lower simply because they have longer life expectancy. So it is more sustainable to draw down lower at the same ages. Then we overlay a second line, which is what we call the annuity rate. And as a reminder, that's just the income rate that you could get from a life annuity. And that by definition is the maximum income that you could draw because it uses a pool to make sure that all incomes are sustainable. So that gives us that upper limit. And then these two lines really split the map into three zones. And we'll talk about these zones on the next page. So now that we know how to read the map, here is what it's actually for. So as I mentioned, the two lines divide it into three zones, and each zone points to a different income solution. Starting at the bottom with a pure electricity, if we want to put it like that, a pure living annuity offers flexibility. Your funds could still run out, but that really is what we dub as the safe zone. So maybe just to explain it again, this is where someone is drawing down at safe rates, so sustainable rates, so at or below that blue line. Then in the middle zone is the risky zone. So this is where they're drawing down more than the safe rate, but still below the life annuity rates. And here a blended annuity would vastly improve sustainability, but without the need to cut income. And that is why that is the optimal solution there. And then finally, that danger zone at the top, where living annuitants are drawing down even at the rates even higher than life annuity rates. And that is really where there's a material risk of running out of money. And that is where in that zone, to fully annuitize is the optimal solution. So that table turns where living annuities are into zones, But here's something maybe you can use on a Monday morning or even a Wednesday morning. So 3 steps that we've just said, taking that map really and saying, looking at those zones, what that optimal, or what we actually call the benchmark blend should be, but then saying, well, let's make it simpler. We've come up with this structure where we say, look at your age firstly. So on the columns, just going through the different age brackets, so 55 to 69, 70 to 79, and 80 plus. Then moving down the rows and finding your or your client's drawdown rate in each of those buckets, and then going furthest to the right and saying, well, if you're in that row, 25% into Julie, or 50 or 75% into the lifetime income. We'll talk a bit about Julie. We've just shortened that just to keep it simple. It really just means just lifetime income. You may notice too that if the drawdowns are below the starting points of these buckets, it does mean you're in that safe zone and you don't actually need a life annuity component. There is an interesting counterintuitive case there, though, where you could argue to exactly guarantee the income that you have to draw down, so guarantee that 2.5%, and that, interestingly, reversely, actually just guarantees your legacy. But nonetheless, so below that 0, and then finally, actually, if you're out of these buckets, it implies you're in the danger zone and you should actually consider annuitizing fully. Okay, so maybe just to stand back a bit and say, well, what does such a hybrid engine look like? I think the first thing to make clear here is that it's one living annuity. So one wrapper, one blue box, simply put, as you can see on the screen there. So it's one living annuity consisting of a few parts. Cash account, but that's really just for liquidity and cash flow. But then the two main parts really being this just lifetime income, so the internal combustion engine, which gives security and reliability, combined with your what we sometimes call the liquid portion or the investment portfolios, and that really provides growth, and in combination, you have a good solution. Okay, but let's put some real numbers to it and just quickly explain why blending makes sense. And we've picked a client here in that risky zone, but let's compare firstly just a pure living annuity. So take this case, for example, let's assume 6 million Rand. The client has to draw down 6% per year from that, which results in 30,000 per month. But then importantly, 6%, if you look at those ACESA tables, which are part of every living annuity quote, which shows the number of years until income reduces, that shows that the income will cap after 21 years because it will hit that cap. And that's assuming a 10% net return. That is after so nominal, so before inflation, but after all other fees, whether that's admin, advice, or investment fees. Okay, so that then only gets you to what's that, 86 years, which may sound okay, but it's not, because 65-year-old males in South Africa, for the kind of population we're looking at here, life expectancy is 82, but that means 50% will live longer than that. And there we typically say you should rather aim for age 95 for men or 100 for females, because there is a low enough or a reasonable probability that they will pass away before then. And that is why we would say this picture is not sustainable. Going to the blended portion, if we now were to take half of those funds and put it into a lifetime income, and we've just assumed for simplicity purposes here that you get a 7% starting income, you'll see here that that gives you then 17,500 per month. What is required to take from the liquid portion is 12,500 to make up that 30,000 in total. And that means, and this is the important part, the effective drawdown in this scenario has now gone down from 6% to 5%. And this is now a sustainable picture. So 17% lower drawdown, not 1%. It's not from 6 to 5, it's not 1%, that's 17% lower. And the effective drawdown here is 5%. And that really, in a nutshell, is why blending makes sense. Here, just to confirm, it gives you guaranteed income, retains flexibility, but gives you sustainable income solution with risks mitigated. Okay, so that was the scene. Now let's look at blending outcomes that we wanted to talk to today. Blending started in 2017 in South Africa. That was a world first, as far as we know. Nowhere else in the world would they combine a life annuity and a living annuity in one wrapper. There are living annuities and life annuities in many other markets, but as far as we know, South Africa was the first country to introduce this. Now, what we did is we tracked case studies using real life data, so actual returns over the period. So we did that from 2017 until the end of 2025. You'll see some numbers going beyond 2025, but know that for most of them, we stop at the end of 2025 to actually have a good period, and we'll see why we say that. We've assumed increases on that lifetime income being equal to the actual increases that were awarded and published. And then importantly, drawdown. So the rand amounts of drawdown were increased by actual inflation each year. And then for each case study, we looked at two parallel scenarios. A pure living annuity. B, a 50% blended living annuity. But let's first stand back and just have a look. And this is only the all share index. So it doesn't look at other asset classes. But you'll probably know that we've actually had very, very good returns from 2017 until the end of last year. In fact, a whopping 126%, not 26% positive, plus 126. So that taking the all share index from around 53,000 to roughly 120,000. For the astute ones out there, we're not at 120 anymore, but more about that a bit later. But looking back at how that 126 arrived, the shape here is quite important. And that is that from January 2017 to September 2022, the market delivered only 18%. It was really since then that we've had amazing performance, plus 92% in those last 3 and a bit years. And that's really what plays into this being such a good example of very good average returns over the period, really, really good returns, but then also a different shape in how that return was delivered. And as we know, the sequence of returns really playing a role, especially in a decumulation or a drawdown portfolio. And you'll see this today. Okay, so back to the case study that I mentioned quickly, but maybe just to put color, and then mapping it on that income sustainability map that we spoke about. So this case, as you can see here, it sits squarely on that, in the middle of that zone. So male age 65, a drawdown of 7.2%, being midway between the annuity rate and the safe rate. And that is what we used, and from there we did build ups with using actual fund returns and actual inflation. And what happened there, and for now just focusing on the pure living annuity path, that showed that over the period, that drawdown rate slid from 7.2 to above 10% over those 9 years. And yeah, you may notice we don't have around 10 years yet. Soon we'll be able to do that for 10 years. But we picked from the outset until the end of last year, which gives us that 9 years. So at age 74, a drawdown above 10. And I think here you can already visually see that it's sliding in the wrong direction. What did those consist of? And I mentioned we used actual fund returns. This is an actual balanced fund that one of the funds we invest into as part of the Just Lifetime Income. I should say this is a top quartile fund, so a good balanced fund. And here what I show are the monthly returns. But you can see generally good returns, but quite a few negative blips as well. Overlaying the annual and then importantly real return over this, so annualizing or accumulating those monthly returns to annual, but then subtracting the actual CPI gives you this coral line. And what we wanted to show here is one thing that we come across is that often people believe as long as the drawdown rate is below the return that they receive, they're okay. And that is not the case. The drawdown should be below the net, so the real return, net of inflation, so that correlline. And here as an example, if you have a 5% net drawdown, and why I say that, so this is because the correlline includes some investment expenses, but it doesn't include, for example, admin fee and advice fee, that 5% is a net number. So comparing that to what we saw in practice and maybe how it then the rubber hits the road here is, I believe in this period, so that first period where the correlline was below the green line, I think those review discussions were tough. Then there was a period of easier discussions, so good returns 2021, 2022, back to tough, flip to positive, back to tough, but then certainly easier since. And here's where I said we updated it more recently just to go beyond the end of 2025, because you can see that it has come down. In fact, if we do the same kind of picture, but then say, imagine you were drawing down 10% net. So what that would mean, for example, is actually, let's say 8.5% that the client draws down, but 0.5% in advice and 1% in admin fee. This would be the picture. And of course, it does mean that the tough periods are longer and more frequent. And quite telling here is that looking at these returns, quite recently that this flipped back into a tough review discussions. So we do think for the higher drawdown clients, there was some relief for a bit, but that is shifting already. Okay, and that's what we really wanted to talk about on this fuel gauge, saying that for a hybrid, you can't only look at the overall drawdown percentage. You should look at the effective drawdown percentage too. Okay, and what we mean with that is, what is that drawdown on the liquid portion? You may recall that example where we said 6% combined, 50% in a life annuity, which gives 7%, means you only need 5% from the remainder. So there's a quick example of how you can determine that. Going back to our example, if we then say what a blended living annuity, how that performed over the period. So that is 50% going into life annuity at age 65. As you can see here, much better. This effective drawdown rate, this shown with the diamond and the dash line, went down, or differently put, actually on the day it would have flipped to that blue line. That's just how it works, and I've stayed very close to it. So for this case, even though the overall combined rate may look high, it still shows a good picture from an effective drawdown rate. Okay, so just to think back then for this case study, so despite really good market performance, blending outperformed pure living annuities for this example that we did. The blended case remained close to or within the safe zone, and the pure living annuity case slid further. And the other thing to note, if you were on a pure living annuity now with that higher rate, you would now actually either have to consider fully annuitizing or blending much more. We'll talk a little bit about that cost of waiting, but this maybe just brings that home. Okay, busier graph. What we wanted to show here is just that if you were to look at this across different case studies, so same story, different color lines now, black being age 60, the green one, dark green, we already did, this purple, age 70, and this, what is that, like rusty red brown, age 75. And each time solid lines showing what the pure living annuity would have looked like, and these dashed lines with diamonds at the end, what a blended case would have looked like. I think you can already clearly see what we want to deduce on the next slide, and that is that similar story to what we saw, but actually the slide is more pronounced, and with slide I mean almost like upward slide, is more pronounced for higher ages. And that is what we say here. Okay, so then the question in the room then is, why not wait? And we know many are waiting at the moment. And what we mean with waiting is waiting to annuitize. And the reason for that would be, and let's just name the elephant in the room. The reason for that would be that the question comes up, so if annuity rates go up with age, why should I not wait? If I buy now, income starts immediately and grows. But if I wait until later, there's a hope for a higher annuity rate. So firstly, annuity rates do go up by age. We'll talk about that more just now. And then, of course, there's also this waiting maybe for rates to go up when yields go up. And on that, yes, we saw much higher bond yields 2-3 years ago. They've reverted back to not low levels. I think actually good but standard levels, but that may be the other reason why someone's waiting. But for that, let's work through some simple examples to show why waiting does not make sense. So let's take, we're moving to a slightly different example, but firstly, this green line here, quite similar to the annuity rate line we had on the income sustainability map, just showing that today, for different ages, you'll of course have a higher annuity rate over time or by age. But focusing on age 65, if you were to get that now, and here's that 7.1% annuity rate, and that is through various factors, but one key thing here, of course, is that life expectancy, and I mentioned already 82. Okay, so that's 7.1%. For a million rand case, this gives us 5,900 per month that you can get right now. If we were to wait until age 75, almost like, let's say we were age 75 today, same yield, so same market data, the rate you can get at age 75 is 10%. So that would give you an income of around 8,300 per month. And here is the thing. If you compare this fairly, though, if you bought into the life annuity today and it would escalate by 5%, all these rates we talk about here today are for 5% fixed escalating, then you would have sat at 11.6% already at age 75. That is a 16% gap or shortfall with what you could get if you were 75 today. So to compare it, yes, the 10% is higher than the 7.1, but you could have been at 11.6% already. But that's not the only thing. You must still have 1 million available at age 75 to be able to buy this life annuity. And to do that while you're taking income, because of course the alternative is not just waiting for 10 years and not living, you must still draw an income. You would actually need a 9% per annum risk-free. So that's a guaranteed rate, which no one can provide. So maybe on one page here, just to remind that age 75, 10% annuity rate, but the required rate is 11.6. So there's a 16% shortfall. And at the same time, a 9% per annum return being required. Waiting is not passive. I think that's the one thing that many people forget, that waiting is a decision and it requires returns, plus you may have a shortfall compared to what would have been the case if you annuitized. On the next section, we wanted to talk about if there is hesitation or concern, and that's the other beautiful thing about blending and how that could work. Because the options are really this, to do nothing, risk stays with the client. You could blend fully now, and what we mean with that is look up in that table, or what we call the benchmark blend, how much you should blend. But that may feel too once-off and irreversible, so someone may hesitate. And if that's the case, so the middle is actually the optimal or the correct theoretical solution. But if there's hesitation, preferred to would be at least to phase blending. And just some visuals to show you what we mean with that. And in this example, we said, well, let's say, and maybe the client should have actually blended 50 or maybe even 75%. But let's say she starts at 25% at age 65, and that gives you that nice layer of certain income, that green tranche. Imagine then that 5 years later, this is then increased to 50%. Another 5 years later, increase further, and you can do that. In fact, it doesn't even have to be in 3 steps. It could be in 10 steps. You can purchase new life annuity tranches as you want them within the blended living annuity. And then finally, let's say that later, when it truly then becomes clear that there's less legacy need or the income need is just really important, one could fully annuitize. But look at the staircase, and here you would already see, so no single step was a big decision. But the end point is exactly where an all or nothing recommendation would have landed. And that's the power of phasing. It's the same destination, but you arrive at it with different steps. And flexibility is retained throughout. So it could work as follows. So secure a first layer now, then monitor it. And here what we would immediately say is also when you monitor it, it's down to considering the effective drawdown that you have on the liquid portion and checking that against these the safe and the risky and the danger zone. So even if you were to blend or be blending already, consider the effective drawdown on the liquid portion, and then phase further as needed. And this makes this whole concept repeatable and gives the advisor a clear review conversation. Yeah, so we would say the secure part of the income today, retain flexibility, but then you reassess over time whether more should be blended. Then over to the final section for today, and you may notice I'm leaving time for questions on purpose at the end. There's quite a lot that we spoke about today, but hopefully some landed, but looking forward to hearing some questions. And this last section is really about AI proofing your advice. And you'll see now why we like to talk about this. And here, and maybe read on the screen. So this is feedback we're getting more and more often, where an advisor comes to us, and maybe we've even spoken about blending before. You heard now that we've been talking about this for 9 years. But then an advisor may come and say, my client asked me about blending after he or she did an AI search on retirement income options. And that is quite telling. The reason we believe this is happening and will happen more and more is that AI, you could call it generative AI or large language models, searches, reward evidence and science, whereas the older style search engine searches rewarded hype and trends. And this is because AI systems are built to weigh credibility and cross-source agreement, and that favors evidence. It is worth noting, of course, that this isn't absolute. AI still depends on answers, correct answers being out there. But I can also say that there is by now just such a big body of research and evidence showing that blending is beneficial, depending, of course, on the drawdown rate. But AI searches with its trillions of nodes would tap into things like that. And I do believe that clients will more and more engage with this and come to you with questions about that when they're considering their retirement income options. And this is where we believe that advisors have an edge. And this is because, so AI will will do many things. It can calculate, it can do drawdown projections, it can pull quotes or estimate quotes. Of course, life insurers and platforms can provide that too. It can do a lot, but it cannot truly recommend it, or it may suggest things. But the advisors really come in, and their recommendation helps to decide when and whether blending is appropriate, how much to blend, and then to help clients act despite hesitation. We spoke about the phasing and all of that. And that's what we believe, especially for retirement income, where it's such a big and often a single point decision, where we hope to believe that clients get help for that, because it's such a big decision. And advisors truly have an edge there. Training, knowledge, but then taking that judgment and helping clients to do something about it. And maybe just talking about the various things we've shown is, so we believe that a strong retirement income recommendation would show where a client sits on that income sustainability map or something similar. So just simply where that drawdown sits relative to a sustainable or safe drawdown rate, what blend percentage is recommended and why, that lookup table, but then also a little bit as to why or how, and then how the client's hesitation was addressed. So maybe just to repeat that, the future of advice, we believe, is not about more projections, more numbers. It could be that too as a foundation, but it's about better judgment and bringing that across to clients. So just to recap then on the 5 things that we think are worth mentioning today. So looking back at some of the things we spoke about today. The first thing is, since launch, blending has outperformed pure living annuities despite strong markets. You could argue there or add to that, and I would do that, depending on where you sat, and you may recall that our examples were in that risky zone. 2, the gauge to watch is the effective drawdown percentage on the liquid portion. That's that fuel light, that gives you that warning light. 3, waiting to annuitize isn't free. We showed how waiting to 75 in our example leaves a 16% income shortfall, but we also mentioned that you would have to get guaranteed or risk-free returns of 9% during that period for the 2 examples to give similar outcomes. So it's not only the income shortfall, it's also the returns required. 4, if not everything now, phase the blend, secure income today, monitor and add more later. And then finally, 5, AI can do calculations, but advisors' judgment turns that into decision and makes it real, makes it tangible, makes it executable, and that's the edge.
Thank you very much, Bjorn, for sharing your insights. That most certainly gives us much to think about and a lot to take away. We will now move to our Q&A session that Jared will be assisting us with. Thank you to everyone who already engaged. You are just an amazing audience. And thanks for those who submitted questions and comments. Jared and Bjorn, let's see what our audience has for us.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Bjorn, for a very insightful presentation. We do have a few questions from our attendees today. The first is, I guess, just a general question on when can we get the slides, and is there a recording available?
Okay, and I think Shane would have come in there, or maybe have, but yes, absolutely, we'll be sharing that, both slides and the recording. So all the ones that have registered, and that's all of you, you'll be getting that.
Great. And now a product-related question from Gwyneth, who asks about whether or not the guaranteed portion in the blended annuity can be a joint annuitant option.
Absolutely. So we didn't talk too much about what the options are, but typically, and let me go through that very quickly, that life annuity portion, because it is so important, has also a few features. I'll make a few comments too around what to consider for those, but typically it varies by 3 things. And I always say this: firstly, it's paid for life, certainly, But then typically what you can add and what you must consider is firstly, by how much should that escalate? So how much should the income increase? And by now the options available in the market are either what we call a fixed escalating, so 5 or 6%. You can have inflation linked, or you can have what we believe to be the best value for money with profit annuities, where the increases are actually linked to the underlying returns of a fund, typically a balanced fund. So that's one, what escalation. Secondly, yes, a spouse's benefit or a second life can certainly be added. What we offer, and that's typical in the market, is either 50, 75, or 100% spouse or second life continuation. And then finally, the third thing is that minimum payment periods or guarantee periods can also be added. One thing worth noting, though, and this is again where the advisor's advice and judgment comes in. If you add longer minimum payment periods or guarantee periods and higher spouse's benefits, you can imagine that that extends the expected payout period of the life annuity, and that will reduce that starting income. That may be required. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it must go into the consideration to say, okay, what is needed? And especially in a hybrid or blended living annuity, there's a strong argument to say, well, let the income part do the best it can. So maybe rather having a lower spouse or second life percentage, lower minimum payment period, such that it relieves even more strain and stress on the rest. So quite a long answer, but maybe just bring it also back to the context of a hybrid living annuity.
I think what's interesting now that you've answered the question, there's been more questions about the second life on a joint life annuity. Just to confirm, second life can be a life partner. It doesn't have to be a legal spouse.
Absolutely, or at least in our world. In fact, it could be in our case, it can be any second life. So it doesn't have to be even a life partner or a spouse. It can be any, we call it a named second life within age limits, typically age 40 and above. But yeah, the name and sex and date of birth and all those things must be known, and that can't change after the life has been added. But yes, it can be any second life.
And that's a very good question from Marilyn. Thank you, Bjorn. The next question we have is from Dickie, who's talking about the calculation tool to assist in running simulations for clients on a blended annuity.
Okay, and there are many out there through our partners. So maybe just giving context. So we work with 6 living annuity partners: Alex Forbes, Alan Gray, Citadel, Signia, PPS, and 27/4. And through that, we make a blend, what we call Just Blend. It's a projection tool available, and that means you can do scenario modeling. I do know that there are other tools out there too, and in fact we support that. You don't have to use the Just Blend tool, but yeah, we can. If you reach out to us, or maybe Jared, we can follow up. We can give access to that, and that gives an even more detailed assessment. It looks a little bit, maybe not entirely like our case studies, but then what I should maybe just add is. That is really what we've come to see as more like a pro tool. And we do think that having something, at least as a starting point, similar to this already helps a lot. But that is down to advisor preference. Some prefer to rather understand a simpler framework and then apply it, or some prefer to truly go and build up a case. And for that, like I said, we do have a projection tool, which is quite powerful, but yeah, can be more complicated. So it's down to what the advisors and clients prefer.
Thank you. Next question is from Paul. Regarding the liquid portion, if the client started with, I'm assuming this is a 25% blend in the free portion, it's imperative that it doesn't drop below this, correct?
And what the it doesn't drop below the 25%. Okay, let me think that through, and I'm gonna just quickly. Okay, I think there's a better way to pick a slide, right? And I'm going to click through. So let me just go to our tranches. So let's say you picked a 25%. The relative value of that can vary over time. So let's just talk about that quickly. It can go up or down, and there will be a few reasons why that can happen. My view here is that gives you that safe income and safety net. My focus on reviews would be to see, well, what is the 75%? So what is the remainder of the living annuity doing? And where are those drawdown rates? If you did 25% based on the benchmark blend, so let's say you did the theoretically a correct answer, I would expect that the liquid portion would then be drawing down at safe rates already. But let's say you actually didn't go all the way yet. You should have done 50%, but decided to at least dip your toes and go for 25%. On the remainder, you need to calculate that effective drawdown. We are engaging with platforms to try and make that easier. But essentially what you do is you look at what's the liquid portion. We know what the overall drawdown is, subtract what you get from that lifetime income tranche, and then calculate the effective drawdown on the rest. Then relate that back to either that lookup table that I showed just now, or that more detailed benchmark blend. And I believe that's the thing to watch out for over time. But whether the 25%, whether the green as a value portion of the entire dips below 25%, I don't think it's that critical unless it is because you're actually still putting too much strain on the liquid portion. Then I would certainly recommend increasing the blend percentage. Okay. Paul, I hope that helps. Please reach out to us separately if that didn't answer your question. We know you well.
I think that goes back to the fuel gauge, where it's all about the effective drawdown. That is what you're managing on the remaining liquid capital.
True. And it's maybe just this here that where if you go show it and you know what that lifetime income portion is, and this example was 17,500. You're drawing down 30 in total, then you know it's 12,500 per month that you're getting from the 3 million, and you can then go calculate this. 12.5 times 12 is 150. Divide that by the 3 million, and that will give you that 5% effective drawdown rate.
Great, thank you. We have a question from John, who's asked, can you have two separate funds, one inflation linked and one with a fixed increase as an example?
Absolutely. I was going to make a joke, but you can have a lot of fun here, guys. Okay, but that's maybe the geek in me coming out. So maybe just to go back to this example, tranche 2 can actually start at exactly the same time as tranche 1 as well. And tranche 2 can look quite different to tranche 1. Not to try and overcomplicate, but at least hypothetically, tranche 2 can have a different, any of the things that I mentioned just now. It can have a different escalation rate. It can have a different second life linked to it. It can have a different minimum payment period and spouse's or second life percentage benefit. So in that sense, you could do almost like call it a hybrid. Within a hybrid, you could say, well, let's have a 5% fixed escalating combined with a with-profit annuity, or we just call it Julie. That absolutely, that is what you can have. You would need to do that at the same time. I mentioned the tool. That tool provides quotes as well, but you would need to draw 2 quotes to just actually transact that in practice. But certainly, you can do that, John.
And then a question from Nguchia. Is the life annuity with capital preservation doable with this blending approach?
Okay, good question. In our world, I mentioned let's call it the death benefit features we have. It's that second life benefit and the minimum payment period. If there is a true need to have all capital retained, even at the point of death, early, let's call it early death, because later you would have received back your money, the mechanism that we recommend is to set the minimum payment period such that, and I mentioned a 7% annuity rate. If you, for example, and set the minimum payment period at 15 years, 15 times 7 is, well, that's, you won't get more than the initial that you put in. But what we do, certainly, and our partners do as well, is at death, if there is a minimum payment period, the remainder of the income we would have paid is commuted, so brought forward and paid as a once-off lump sum. That is then a way to preserve capital. Having said that, as I also mentioned, those things do provide, just like a true normal capital preservation option out there, it definitely puts a drag on the income rate. And remember that especially within the blended living annuity, you still have the liquid portion available on death. So you may not want to overcook the death benefit feature, because it could erode the overall sustainability. And that's maybe down to preference and the hesitation or phasing, or looking at the projections in more detail, because you will see that trade-off. You may have better immediate legacy coverage, but the trade-off could be that your future income sustainability may not look as attractive. And don't forget that clients would rather worry about today and tomorrow. But I believe from an advice point of view, we must make sure that they have an income that's sustainable for their lifetime. But very good question. I hope that answered it. And yeah, reach out to us separately if you want to know more.
I see we are running out of time. We've got less than a minute left, but we do have a very important question. Can these slides be shared with our clients?
I am very comfortable with that. So yes, and please do shout if you have questions around the slides. We've tried to keep it not too technical, but I think you would agree that there were quite a few numbers and examples today. But yeah, please shout if you have questions.
One last question, if we can fit this in. Paul is asking, can you make additional contributions to an existing blended living annuity?
You mean as add further capital? I think that's a platform question, and I believe not. So you'd probably end up having multiple living annuities, of which each can then be blended. But yeah, that is as far as I know. And why I say that, so maybe just from a product point of view, we provide that internal combustion engine in the deal. We don't do the actual hybrid engine. So Paul, this may be an engagement with your platform provider, but as far as I know, you'd probably need to create a second living annuity, or a living annuity. I know some call it deals, but that can then be blended again.
Thank you very much, Bjorn, Jared, and our audience for the engagement and for the great questions. If we haven't managed to get to your questions, and there we have committed, the Just team will follow up after the session where appropriate. We hope that you enjoyed today's session and you find it useful, and importantly, hopefully you took some practical ideas that you can take into your retirement income conversations with your clients. As mentioned already, a recording of today's webinar will be made available, and attendees will receive their CPD points for participation. We will share the recording and issue certificates later in the week. Thank you again for joining us today. Goodbye, just for now.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.